a talk or a speech or something like that, you never from the beginning give away your big punchline, because then nobody will pay attention for the rest of the time. But I kind of ignored that, and I'm going to do that today. And I actually wrote it in your bulletins in the notes of what we're doing here this morning. What I'm teaching on, the point I'm making is men need to stand to the call of leadership. Men need to stand to the call of leadership. And I think we underestimate the importance of that phrase in general, and we underestimate how much the Bible stresses men taking leadership, not only in the church, but in the family, in the home, in their jobs, all over. And this isn't in a sexist way. This isn't in a men lording it over. And I hope you can understand that as we talk today. But I really want you to take home, men need to stand to the call of leadership. And I was thinking about it. It's a little too late for anybody to leave now because all the kids are gone. So if you guys try to sneak out, I'm going to see you. So don't. And ladies, this is your morning. I'm going to be speaking to the men in large part. So it's actually your turn to take a little nap. You don't have to nudge your husbands. They need to pay attention. Well, actually, you do need to stay awake because you need to be able to wake them up. And say, yeah, this one's for you. In the past few weeks, I've been reading a book, and I don't know if anybody's ever read this book before. It's called Point Man, and it's an awesome book. It's all about stepping up in leadership, being a leader in the home, being a leader in the church, and it really convicted me. And I think it was the book that really convicted me of some things that the Bible has always been teaching. And I knew a lot of the stuff, but it was just the way that Steve Farrar, the author, had just put some things really in a convicting way for me. How are we leading as men? How are we doing this? And there was a lot of things that came to mind when I thought about leading as men. A lot of dead churches came to mind. A lot of failing churches came to mind. And I think we've all seen it in small towns in Iowa and in large cities in Iowa, places all over, churches that have completely collapsed and died, and basically just grown old together and died. And the reason is because men aren't stepping up, leadership isn't stepping up and saying, how are we training the next generation? We're too concerned are we comfortable here where we are, and not enough about what's the next generation doing? How are we training up the young men and women so that they take this church, so that they lead this church into the next generation? And so we see churches kind of shrivel up and die. And the point of Point Man, the point of the book in general, if you haven't read it, is men, you're being lazy, and your family, friends, and church all see it. But most important, God sees it. And that's the main point that I took away from that book. It just calls it out straight as an arrow. It just says, this is what you're doing, men. You're not stepping up in areas that you should be. You're being lazy in the church. You're being lazy in how you raise your kids. You're being lazy in your marriage. Single guys, you're being lazy in how you serve and how you work. And that was very convicting for me because I don't like to think of myself as a lazy person. I don't know how many people like that. But when somebody calls you out on something, it makes you question, it makes you think. And it makes us kind of wonder what God has in store for us. God has designed men for greatness, and we've settled for TV. God has designed men for leadership, and we've settled for yard work and a good-looking yard. God has designed you for headship, and you've settled for the back row. God has designed us for so much more than what we're fulfilling. And that's what I want to call us to today. As I was reading this book, I couldn't help but feel a deep conviction in my own life and in the life of the church in general. And so I hope as I say this, it doesn't discount me before I kind of really get into things this morning. But There was one large area in particular for myself personally. My wife, for the last 5 years since we've been married, has been encouraging me, asking me, even pleading with me at times, to lead her in biblical devotions. And, I always had a great excuse. Well, we're tired in the morning, or what's going on, or this or that. I'm too busy. I'm too lazy. And the reality is that I was more concerned with arguing an excuse than I was concerned with changing because of what God's Word says. And I think men, we get caught up in that. We want to argue our point until our wives give up. And then our wives say, fine, whatever, okay. And we're like, all right, I won. Well, we didn't win anything. We've argued a point to death that nobody agreed with, and we've walked away. That's not leadership. That's not men taking leadership. That's not men taking headship. That's just us defending our laziness. And I would say that my wife was very gracious over the last 5 years and has come back to me time and time again. But the reality is I was not willing to lead where God had always been calling me to lead. I was more concerned with my excuse than I was with God's Word. And I thought to myself, if not for anyone else this morning, I need this sermon to preach to myself. Every once in a while, you need to preach to yourself a little bit what you're learning in the Word and really start teaching yourself and learning. And I felt like if for nobody else in this room, and we're going to be a little bit ignorant if we think this is for nobody else, but if for nobody else, I want to teach this to myself. So please come along with me in this. This book stirred up in me again what God's Word has been preaching from the very beginning. God has created us for the headship and the leadership, and we simply standing by and hoping that someone else steps up. I want you to open up, and it'll be on the screen with us, 1 Corinthians 10, chapter 10, 1 through 13. And I'm going to read it. It's a long passage, but please follow along with me, and we're going to break it down. 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 13. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now these things occurred as an example to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters as some of them were, as it was written. The people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan rivalry. We should not commit sexual immorality as some of them did. And in one day, 23,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord as some of them did and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble as some of them did and were killed by the destroying angel. These things happened to them as an example and were written down as warnings for us on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. So basically, Paul is talking to the Corinthian church here. And if you don't know much about Corinth, Corinth was a city. It was a trade city. There was a lot of people moving in and out of Corinth. Corinth was a very wealthy city. There was people constantly coming in and out. And what that meant was that there was gods and idols everywhere. Because people were traveling from afar. They were going out, getting new idols, bringing them back to Corinth. And so that's why you see Paul address the church of Corinth in two different books, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and he addresses just a huge amount of issues going on in this church. He came through, he planted a church there, and then he moved on, and he obviously hears some things going on, and he writes these books back to them saying, whoa, we need to kind of calm down, and you're going a lot of different directions here. You're trying to follow after these other gods. You're pulling in what seems nice, and oh, yep, that seems good. And he's saying, no. Don't stray from the gospel that was first taught to you. And so what we have here, though, in verse 6, Paul breaks this down. He says, see what the people before you have done. Learn from them. Don't just take the Bible, read it, and say, wow, that was a long time ago. See you later. Take it and learn from the example that is set for you. Basically, he breaks it down. He says, remember Moses? Remember the cloud that led them through the desert? I don't know about how many of you, but I've never had a river part for me. I've never had a sea part for me. But I'm thinking if I go out to the river out here and all of a sudden, it parts and I'm able to walk through on dry land, that's not something I easily forget. But yet, he says, these people who saw the cloud, God's presence in the cloud, the people who walked through the Red Sea, not many of them really understood because they let their hearts stray a lot of different ways. And obviously they wandered around in the desert for 40 years while a whole generation of them died. It was the cleansing of Israel because God said, these people don't trust me. They're not following my example. They're not following my servant. I'm going to let them wander around for 40 years. I don't know about you, but sometimes I want to think of myself a little better than I am, and I think, man, those Israelites, were they just a bunch of dummies? Like, they couldn't just walk in one direction to get out of the desert? No, God said, I'm not going to let that happen. He said, you're just going to wander around in circles and look like a bunch of dummies until this whole generation is gone. And then this generation rises up where Joshua and Caleb come in and they say, let's do this. Let's go into the promised land. Let's take what's been given to us. And they move on. So Paul looks back and he says, look at the example that's set before you. The people who are not understanding God, the people who are not stepping up to God's call, they got left in the dust. The people who stood up and said, God is with us, who can be against us? Those people, they got to go in. What is the example that is set for us? Verses 7 through 10, he says, don't sit by and lust after a different life, living as though God had no place in your life. Men, this is a call to us. It could be glamorous to think, man, what if I was this football star? What if I was, in baseball? Man, if I had only made that one pass in high school, they would have gotten recruited. Let it go, all right? Didn't happen. Live the life that God has called you to live where you are now, in the job that you are at now, in the position you're at now. God is calling you to do great things where you are. I don't care where you are. He's saying, do with what I've given to you. Don't indulge in sexual immorality. Verses 7 through 10, he says, don't put Christ to the test. Don't complain that others have it better. The Israelites were famous for grumbling, right? Oh, God, we need food. Why don't you give us different, food? Oh, here's some food. Oh, God, we want different food. We don't like this food anymore. Okay, well, here's some different food. Don't grumble and complain in this position you're in. Thank God for what He's given us. The gifts that He's given us, the talents that He's given us. How are we using those for the service and the glory of God? And basically you read up and you see, in doing so, Israel receives strict punishment because of their grumbling, because of their complaining, because of their complacency. And then finally, the main section of this text that I want to get to is verse 11 through 13. I want to read that one more time. Verse 11 through 13 says, these things happened to them as an example and were written down for us, or as a warning for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. Hone in on this verse right here. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. Verse 12 is huge, and I think that's the problem. Don't just think that because we're sitting in a church and you're here, all right, man, I'm good. I can just relax. I'm at church, right? When it comes to standing up to the call of what God has given us, being at church, just the simple act of making it through the doors is only about 10%. There's a whole other 90% out there of what it means to lead. And I'm not going to downplay, it does take leadership to get your family through the door. It does take leadership to walk, get up every morning, on a Sunday, get ready, get through the doors. But that's about 10% of it. There's another 90% that says there's ministry to be done outside of these walls. There's ministry to be done inside of these walls. There's ministry to be done all over this city. And what does that look like for us? How do we do that? How do we fulfill that ministry? One of the most dangerous, ravaging, painful weapons that Satan uses against us in this church, in the church, the national church around the world, is complacent men. Complacent men are the death of church. When men sit back and say, well, we're doing good, we're fine, let's just keep doing what we're doing, it's working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But there's a lot of churches that might not look broken, but they're not growing. They're not sustaining themselves. They're not being challenged in the Word. What does it look like to grow as men and women of God? How many families have fallen due to complacent men who thought they were doing enough to get by? How many families have just fallen apart because the man has, I provide food and money, so what else do I got to do? There's lots. There's lots of leadership that needs to be provided. There's lots of work that needs to be done inside the home. How many churches have fallen the same way? Paul says, don't sit around being complacent waiting for others to do something. Get on your knees daily and serve your God. Get on your knees daily and serve your family. Get on your knees daily and serve your church. Paul says in 1 Timothy 3:1, the saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Paul calls to leadership here. His call to leadership is based on men who are seeking and aspiring to the office of elder and overseer. He says this is a good thing. He looks around to the church of Corinth, or he calls to Timothy and says, look what you're doing here, all right? You're leading this church. What I want you to do is I want you to tell people, look around. Being an overseer, being an elder, that's a good thing. The men in your church should desire that. They should be thinking in their hearts, what do I need to do to just align myself with God to become this man of God that I could be an elder in this church? I could be a leader in this church. What does that look like for me in my life? What is that for you? What would it look like for you to have people coming to you saying, wow, this is a leader. We need him leading this church. But it seems that in the church today, we have a lack of men standing up to lead the ministries of his people. The church is always searching around, well, who's going to lead this? I don't know. I know we struggle with it in my home church. Every year we have votes on elders and our administration team, which is kind of like our deacon board. And every year we sit there and we think, who are the next leaders? I don't know. Wait, where's this next generation? I don't know. Our elder board is getting older. They're not getting any younger. And we keep looking down and saying, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And the reality is if the elder board isn't training up new leaders, nothing's going to happen. And so there's this call to leaders, to men. What are we doing to fix this problem in the church? Man, God has called us to something better. How do we change our lives to fit the description of 1 Timothy? The description of an elder, the description of a leader. Some of us might have a lot of work to do, and that's okay. God is a God of grace. He's a God of freedom. He's a God of forgiveness. But He doesn't say, sit back and let it happen to you. He says, get up and do something. Make this happen. I want to push you into this. I want to push you along the way to grow, to nurture, to nourish one another. He has called us to more than setting up tables while someone else runs the ministry. He's called us more than Sunday social gatherings where we catch up with buddies. God is calling you to be leaders in front of this church and behind the scenes of this church. I want to tell you a little story out of the book Point Man. The author, Steve Farrar, is a little bit of an older gentleman, and he basically tells this story about Vietnam. And he says, one day before we went out on patrol, my commanding officer came to me and he said, "Hey Steve, you're going to be the point man on this patrol. And so I need you to take this unit, of 7 guys, him including him, it was 8, and you're going to go out on patrol, and you're going to lead the group." And he just describes what the feeling of that was. Wow, I'm in control of this group. Their lives are basically in my hands. He said, my senses were just on high alert. As we walked the path, I'm just thinking every little sound, I'm just thinking, what's going to go on? And I had been on hundreds of those patrols, but today I was in control. I was responsible for the men behind me. And I just thought as I was walking, every little sound just made me kind of flinch a little bit. And he said, out of nowhere,